Alright, so today we are going to be taking a dive into British literature. Um, Specifically, we're going to be focused on three different eras in British literature. We're going to be focusing on the Romantic era, the Victorian era, and the Modernist era. All three of these eras are different in what would be written about, what makes the era what it is. And to introduce this, I'm going to introduce the color plates that are on this page. In the bottom left, we have a color plate from the Romantic era. On the top right, we have a color plate from the Victorian era. And on the bottom right, we have a Modernist era color plate. And as you can see, all three are very different, and all three would be answering a question or a topic of that era. And I hope by the end of this presentation, you'll have a greater knowledge of what each era is questioning or answering. So the first era that we're going to present to you today is the Romantic era. Now the Romantic era is a era with a great appreciation of nature and a great appreciation of the rustic life that is undisturbed from the city. Many of the writers of this period would be living away from the cities in an area that is undisturbed so they could appreciate nature in the greatest way. This is not a period where the writers would be appreciating, dainty things of the city, but they would be appreciating nature and the power that nature has. Another topic of interest would be in the mystic and the supernatural or godlike character and what this character played on the role that this character played in the lives of the speakers or the characters in the stories. An example of this would be Blake's poetic genius. Some of the notable writers of the time would be Wordsworth, Coleridge, Byron Shelley, Barbauld. There's many other writers of the time that fit into the Romantic era. But specifically today, what we're going to focus on is a poem by a Romantic poet and writer named Samuel Coleridge. Now, Coleridge was close with Wordsworth as well. At one point in his life, they lived next to each other, and they were appreciating, this rustic life together. So, in Frost at Midnight, though, why is Frost at Midnight a Romantic era poem? Well, the first thing that is evident in the poem is the great interest that it has in the common life that is undisturbed, so the rustic life. And we see this in lines 54 and 55. I'm going to quote, "But thou shalt wander like a breeze by lakes and sandy shores." Now, what Coleridge is doing here is speaking to his infant son at night and just appreciating the fact that his son will be able to be in nature at such a young age, where we learn that the speaker at a young age was in the city, but now, as an older individual, is living out this rustic life. Another way that this poem is a Romantic era poem is the way that nature has a power in this poem. So specifically, the fire in the poem. This fire, simply looking at the fire, allows the speaker of the poem to have the ability to reminisce on younger days and even younger days than those. And just this fire, this nature has a power that comes with it that allows the speaker to feel deeper than he could without nature. So that is Frost at Midnight. We're going to move now into the Victorian era. So the Victorian era, this is an era that is a movement towards industry and the city and social class, and this is when lots of questions come up on gender, and pretty much any subject was okay as long as it was relevant to the time. So this caused a great amount of variety in the subjects that were being written about in the poems and the stories. In the bottom right color plate, we see an example of industry. We're seeing men lay a sewer in a city. We're seeing, life going on around while these men are working and while at putting the sewer into the city. We see, intellectuals in the painting. We see the nobles in the painting. We see the lowly, um, people selling flowers. And we see all of them. But who we really see idolized are the men laying the the sewer, the common worker, the man who's working. The nobles, they're in the back in the shadows. So this is very important to this era. Some of the notable writers of this time would be Tennyson, Dickens, Arnold, Browning. And actually, today, what we're going to be looking at is a Browning poem. One last thing about the Victorian era that will be important to the Browning poem is this is a great question between relationship from man and God. So between man and God, there is a relationship, and so some of the poems and stories would question this relationship between man and God and the way God relates to man or man to God. So the poem we're going to be looking at is entitled "The Bishop's Orders." The bishop orders his tomb at St. Praxed's Church. We see a portrait of Robert Browning there, and we actually see a picture of St. Praxed's Church. We see it's a beautiful church. It's a beautiful cathedral there. So this gives you an image of where this poem is being placed at. Obviously, this is far different than the romantic Frost at Midnight, where they're in a lowly cottage, living a rustic life. Obviously, this church is beautiful with beautiful colors, and it's a place where many people would gather. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this poem is focusing 100% on God. And actually, I'll argue that this shows a relationship or lack of between the bishop and God. And that's what makes this a Victorian era poem. There's a questions the intentions of religion. This bishop in this poem, this is a man of God, yet in line 3 of the poem, he is speaking of illegitimate children that he's had over the years. And also shows that he has a tangible desire and want over the supernatural or afterlife. This man is not thinking about his time, he's going to be spending eternity with God. What he is thinking about is his lapis lazuli, which is a very rare blue, emerald that is, this man is hidden from the church. He's taken from the church whenever it burnt down, and he has hidden it. So he's more worried about who's going to have his tangible riches than what he's done, for his afterlife. And this is a really relevant topic to the time. Church was still important to people at this point in time. Religion was very important to the people at this time. So this was a very relevant topic that Browning was writing on. And it shows, as I said, a sense of social class structure. This bishop is constantly worried about how he's going to be portrayed compared to this Gandalf character that he talks about often. And the grave that Gandalf has, the speaker wants his to be, 10 times better than Gandalf's was. So this is our dive into Victorian era. The next era we're going to go over is the Modernist era. I apologize. So the Modernist era, we see a picture of Virginia Woolf, one of the more famous modernist writers, writer of Mrs. Dalloway, which is a very unique novel to say the least. So to begin with the Modernist era, there are 3 categories that are usually lumped into the Modernist era, and that's Edwardian, Georgian, and Modern. So Edwardian era would be when King Edward was king, and then Georgian when King George was king, and then modern would be after George has passed. One of the largest things about the modernist era is the experimentation with form and its effect that this form has on the poem or story. This is very unique to this era as opposed to especially the Romantic era. Um, a poem, if it's written in an awkward form, most likely it has a very important role that it plays on the poem or story. Um, we see a shift in view from the Victorian era to the Modernist era. A few of these shifts would be from an ordered view to a chaos view, meaningful view to a futile view, optimistic view to a pessimistic view, a stable view to an unstable view, faith view to loss of faith view. So as we can see, modernists at this time would be going through World War One. So this war had a major effect on the writers and the people of the time, and that's what's caused this shift from ordered and meaningful and optimistic to chaos, futile, and pessimistic. And with this, wondering, this confused sense of identity, and wondering where one's place is in the world. All of these thoughts led to a interest in how one thinks, psychology, how the human brain works and thought process. And we actually see this very evident in Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway, which we are not going to focus on today, but is a fantastic novel that shows that. And some of the other notable writers of the time would be Hardy, Yeats, Eliot, and many others. So we're actually going to focus on Hospital Visitor by Alice Fane Schroeder. So, as I said earlier, World War I had a major effect on the people of the time, and this poem, The Hospital Visitor, allows one to feel as if they are visiting the hospital of World War I themselves. And it shows many of the shifts in view from the Victorian era to the modern era. Some of those shifts in view would be the voice of the speaker is very, very pessimistic. The speaker goes to visit these people to bring them cigars and cigarettes and other, goods and trinkets to get their mind off of this terrible war that they've been fighting in. But we don't necessarily see the soldiers feeling the same way as the speaker. Actually, the soldiers are very pessimistic, one can say, but that's what deals with the thoughts. We can actually see in this poem, the speaker's thoughts are in parentheses, so we are actually able to see what the speaker is thinking and not saying when words are in the parentheses, which this correlates to the soldiers and makes one wonder what the soldiers were thinking while they're acting the way they are in the poem, which is very, they're full of jokes, they're full of fun, but it really makes one question what the true intentions of the soldiers are, what they're really feeling on the inside. And suffering, we see in lines 24 and 25, it states, "And suffering has not spoiled their ready wit, and oh, you hardly doubt their fighting pluck." These men are covering up their unstable and chaotic war with jokes and wit, as I stated earlier, which makes one really wonder: are they feeling the way that are their body language is showing? Are they feeling the same pessimistic, chaotic, and a loss of faith and everything that fits with the modern view? All right. So in closing, I just want to state a couple things. One being that there are many different dates that an era could have began. Many scholars will argue over different dates, but some are more looked upon in a greater light than others. But there's always a great variety. There's also a great variety in the literature and art from each era. Some of the literature could fit into multiple categories, such as Thomas Hardy's Hap. Part of this being that Hardy was writing in the middle of two different eras. He was writing in the Victorian and the modern era, but Hap was written during a time period of the Victorian era, but shows very modern ideas. But with this being said, most of the literature is fairly easy to identify, as the color plates showed on the title page. And as I stated earlier, each of these eras are very important for different reasons. And these eras, without these eras, we would not have the people that we look back on, such as Tennyson, such as Eliot, such as Yeats, such as Wordsworth. We wouldn't have these notable writers that we look back upon and we build upon without these eras. So I hope this presentation has assisted you in learning more about the Romantic, Victorian, and modern eras. And have a great day. Thank you.